Hey, welcome. Today, we're going to tackle a huge question, one that's kind of at the heart of all education. How do we actually know if it's working? I don't just mean, can students pass a test? I mean, is the whole learning experience truly effective? And to help us figure it out, we're going to look at the work of a man they called Mr. Education himself, Ralph W. Tyler. So let's start with something we've all been through, right? You get an A on a big test. Feels great. But what does that A actually mean? Does it mean you just crammed a bunch of facts into your brain for a couple of days? Or does it mean you can take that knowledge and use it to think, to create, to solve problems you've never seen before? And that, right there, is the exact problem that Ralph Tyler was talking about nearly a century ago. See, he noticed this massive gap opening up. On one hand, you have tests for just recalling information, like matching vocab words. On the other, you have the ability to actually apply what you've learned. He argued that we were getting really, really good at measuring the first thing and just kind of crossing our fingers and hoping we were teaching the second. All right, so here's our game plan for this explainer. We're going to walk right through Tyler's method for closing that gap. We'll start with the why, then look at how to find real evidence of learning, check out the clever tools he built, see how assessment can have a real purpose, and finally, look at his legacy today. Okay, so first things first. For Tyler, it was super simple. You can't figure out if you've arrived if you don't even know where you're going. Before you even think about writing a test, you have to start with the why. You've got to define some really clear objectives. Now, what you're seeing here, this was a totally revolutionary way to think about it back then. An objective isn't just a list of chapters in a textbook. No, it's a desired change in the student. It's all about their behavior, the way they think, feel, and act. Can they analyze data better? Can they think more critically? The whole focus shifts from the stuff you're teaching to the student you're teaching. And this quote from Tyler himself just nails it. You see, for him, this wasn't just some new testing technique. It was a whole new way of thinking about what education is even for. It's not about pouring information into someone's head. It's about helping a person fundamentally change for the better, develop new skills, new ways of thinking. Okay, so let's move on. If you know what changes you want to see in a student, how do you find actual proof that those changes are happening? For Tyler, you had to get creative. You had to observe what students were doing in situations that really tested the skills you cared about. So check this out. He ran this really cool experiment. He took a group of biology students, gave them some data, and said, okay, write down the most logical conclusion. Then he took another group, gave them the exact same data, but this time he gave them a multiple choice list and just asked them to pick the best conclusion. On the surface, those sound like pretty much the same skill, aren't they? Well, yeah, the data said something completely different. This number you see, 0.38, that's the statistical correlation between how students did on the two tests. Just so you know, a perfect connection would be a 1. A 0.38, it's barely a connection at all. It's incredibly weak. And here's the kicker. What Tyler proved was that picking the right answer from a list is a totally different skill than coming up with an answer on your own. That easy-to-grade multiple choice test, it was completely missing the real goal, which was to measure scientific reasoning. It was finding the wrong evidence. So this discovery meant one big thing. Our tests had to get way smarter. If you have different kinds of learning goals, well, you're going to need different kinds of tests to measure them. It's time to build a better toolkit. So Tyler broke down what we learn into these different buckets. Yeah, you've got basic information, sure, but you've also got reasoning, the skill of finding data when you need it, specific hands-on skills, and even judging technical performance. This whole framework just forces you to think about learning in all its different shapes and sizes, not just memorizing facts. And to measure these different things, he came up with some really clever new kinds of tests. Take his master list test, for example. Instead of a simple matching quiz, you give students a big, long list of key terms. Then you give them a shorter list of definitions to match. By making that first list longer, you basically make it impossible to guess the last few answers by elimination. It's such a simple but brilliant way to make a test more about what you know and less about lucky guesses. Now, for Tyler, all this data, all these test results, they weren't just about sticking a grade on a report card at the end of the year. He believed the person who needed this information the most was the teacher. The real point was to give teachers a kind of feedback loop, something they could use to make their teaching better right then and there. He actually laid out 4 kinds of tests that are super helpful for teachers. You've got placement tests to figure out where a student should start, diagnostic tests to find out why they might be struggling, mastery tests to see if they're ready for the next topic, and my favorite, tests of generalization to see if they can use what they've learned in totally new situations. Basically, the test becomes a guide for the teacher. All right, so when you pull all this together, the clear goals, finding the right evidence, building better tools, and using tests to actually help teachers, what's the big takeaway? What's his legacy? How did his ideas change things? Well, his way of thinking was a huge deal. It was actually the foundation for giant national programs like the one people call the Nation's Report Card, the NAEP. Now, this program doesn't give scores to individual kids or schools. Instead, it gives us this big picture, census-like view of what American students as a whole really know and can do, which is exactly what Tyler was talking about, getting a real sense of what students can actually do. And that really brings us full circle, right back to where we began. The challenge that Tyler left us with is just as powerful today as it was almost 100 years ago. When we design our schools, our classes, our tests, are we just doing what's easy to grade? Or are we doing the hard work, the important work, of figuring out what's really worth learning and then finding creative ways to see if it's actually sticking? It's a question we should all still be asking.